Mass Youth Soccer is connecting with local professionals to gain knowledge and provide tips for parents, players, and coaches of what is currently being seen due to the pandemic. Today, we are thankful to have Dr. Warren Bodine with us, who practices in Lawrence and is a director of sports medicine. So, Dr. Warren, thank you for being with us today, and we appreciate you helping us spread some knowledge from what you've been seeing due to the pandemic. So thank you.
Of course. Yep. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Lynn.
Awesome. So based on what you've seen with many youth having a decreased amount of physical activity, what would you recommend to both players and adults should be keeping in mind as we kind of move in the direction of increasing activity?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think we're all yearning for getting back to some sense of normal. And I think obviously athletics can help with that, and especially soccer. So I think that that's all fine and good. And I think we can do that in a safe fashion. And I think that the clubs that played in the fall in the Commonwealth demonstrated that soccer can in fact be played in a safe fashion. With very minimal risk of transmission of virus. So I think that's all fine. But we also have to think about the athlete, right? Again, a lot of our families and a lot of our clubs throughout the Commonwealth have different varying levels of physical activity they've been engaged with over the course of the last 11 months since this pandemic started. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that everyone's coming from a different starting line. And I think it's important that, the first day of practice, if the club that your town is in is moving forward with a season in the spring for outdoor, and, you're signing your children up to do so, and members of your family, realizing that there's going to be an acclimatization period. In other words, these are athletes that have been deconditioned over the course of the last and depending on what schools that they're currently engaged with, they may have also been not in person for school either, where they could have stolen some form of physical activity in recess or PE. So I think you have to realize that everyone's starting at a different starting point. With that being said, Massachusetts is also not the most kind as it comes to climate. As I stare outside my window right now at a couple of, inches of ice-covered snow that are sitting outside. So I'm fully aware that getting outdoor physical activity may be difficult, if not impossible for some folks. But there are other ways to steal exercise. There are ways you can do things indoors, other ways you can get your heart rate up. But I think it's really important for coaches and players and parents to recognize that that student athletes are going to be coming back to playing their sports not in the same condition that they completed their last season. So for most folks, we didn't have a season in the spring. For most of our member clubs in Massachusetts. So you have to kind of benchmark this back to fall of 2019. So the condition that the student athletes were in at that point is a distant memory. So they are going to be deconditioned. I think everyone has to be kind to themselves, especially the athletes themselves, realizing that you're not going to be expected to be at the same match fit shape that you were when you completed your season back in fall of 2019. So I think it's really important. And in finding ways to steal exercise, getting creative. I think obviously with outdoor physical activity, depending on what you're comfortable with, you can probably do something. But for most folks, this may be stuck to doing things on the indoor side of things and indoors in their house. So finding ways to do anything to get the heart rate up. Not to get kids to exhaustion, but getting them close. Things that would simulate what they would be doing on the soccer field in practice and in game-like situations. So doing things to get their heart rate up, just to get their body acclimated to when they actually hit the field again in the spring, so that it's not a complete shock to their system.
Right.
We also realize not only from the physical conditioning aspect, but also the muscular aspect. I think a lot of what I'm speaking to right now is speaking more towards the cardiovascular fitness, but we also have to think about the musculoskeletal fitness of our student athletes. Remote school for most of our athletes in the Commonwealth was a newer thing, and something, prior to the pandemic, if we said to parents, it's going to be a really good idea to put kids in front of a screen for 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, you probably would have went to a different healthcare provider if they said that's the most safe thing for them. So I think it's important to realize that the muscular aspect of deconditioning is a real thing as well. So finding ways to, build that up, whether it be sit-ups, push-ups, squats, jumping jacks, all these things that, would have been seen as maybe warm-ups for soccer before practice, might be, exertional exercise for your children right now in terms of where they are from their conditioning perspective. So, any form of movement is good. More is better. And I think that, getting creative in this scenario is really important, because what we don't want to happen is that first day of practice, those first weekends of games, for coaches and families to deal with a multitude of musculoskeletal injuries,
Right.
On top of, worrying about whether or not they're physically conditioned from a cardiovascular perspective. So I think anything, and you can find resources, I'm pretty sure on the MISO website, you can find resources online of how you can get creative with this, YouTube videos. So I don't have allegiance to any of those things. Obviously, I think MISA is doing a really nice job of putting different drills and scenarios on the website for coaches to look at. But again, for a spring season, this is February 17th that we're recording this. We're about 6 to 8 weeks away from games starting in April, depending on when things thaw out. So those conditioning scenarios should start to be thought out right now. So these things already moving forward, and if not today, sometime hopefully this week.
Right. Yeah. And that was going to be, my next question is how long does that acclimation period kind of last? And I'm sure it depends on the starting point, right, for the athlete, but, kind of a minimum, are you thinking like 4 weeks for most typical athletes as to where they're at currently?
Yeah, I think the best recommendation we have right now is we look for the NCAA. So for collegiate sports, now again, different lens that we're looking through. So collegiate sports have usually more resources than an intramural travel soccer club. And that differs from club to club. I get that. But I can confidently say the NCAA resources are a little bit more, a deeper bench to pull from than it would be for an intramural or a travel club. So with that being said, they recommend 6 weeks for their athletes from an acclimatization period. So I'd say at least that, if not more, given where your athletes are. And again, realizing despite all this, you're still probably not going to get to the level that you were from a physical whether it be cardiovascular or musculoskeletal fitness perspective, as you were when you completed your last full season prior to COVID. So I think that's really still, even in a best case scenario, you're going to notice that kids are going to be winded more. They're going to feel more fatigued. You're going to see more cramps. You're going to see a lot of these different things play out that normally you would maybe see more in a hotter, more humid day. You may, see play out in early April when the temperatures may be in the 40s or 50s, where you normally wouldn't expect to see those same complaints come out.
And it's important, I think, to that point, for the players to be forgiving of themselves, not to set that high bar, that high expectation, and to realize that it is going to take a little bit of time. You can't just pop right back into where you think you were at.
Exactly. Yeah. Much like, a regular, you fracture an ankle, day after you fracture an ankle, day 2, you're not going to be expected to run or sprint on it. If you're able to bear a little bit of weight on it, that's great, but that's even a far stretch. So that, I think forgiveness is going to be key and a really good guiding principle for everyone that's participating in the sport. And I think it's important for parents to realize as well, right? I think that, the competitive nature of sports, we've been all hanging out in the back, not doing much, and want to put that energy somewhere. And that and I think in a normal situation, that energy going out into a soccer field and cheering on your child, cheering on your child's team, all really important, but also being mindful of conditioning aspect that those athletes may not be able to exert as much energy, sprint as faster for as long as they were prior to the pandemic. So I think it's really important that all participants are fully, bought into the fact that being forgiving of yourselves is really
important. Good. And from the coach's perspective, they've been away from the field probably, just the same amount as the players have. Is there anything that they should be kind of tuned into as they're reconnecting with the athletes on the field?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good part. We have to think about this not only from the how do we get people back out into the pitch perspective, but also how do we execute that? And I think coaching is extremely important, right? For the clubs that have competed in the fall, and maybe some of the clubs that are competing indoors, they already have a little bit of an edge on the folks that haven't been competing at all. So they have an edge on, what does practice look like, with COVID restrictions in place. Some of the maybe the go-to drills that you always have in your back pocket may not be there anymore given some of the social restrictions. So I think it's important to this year more than ever, especially for the season, there's going to be a lot more preparation going into the season of what do your practices look like. Rehearsing them in your head, rehearsing them on paper, marching them out. Again, there's a lot of restrictions, right? There's going to be limited space, limited time for your teams to practice. So I think it's important you want to make the best of all the time that you do have and the time you get to interact with your athletes. But you want to do it in a safe way. And I think with that being said, I think forgiveness here is also really important that coaches realize that. We as a society went through something pretty traumatic in the last year. No one that's probably walking earth right now gone through something like this. Maybe there's a couple of people that are, over 100 that are, maybe, still healthy enough that they're able to see this play out, that lived through a pandemic in 1918. But really, no one in our society has gone through this before. We're all learning this together. The fact that we had to transition our complete way of life and pivot and shift to, a lot of social isolation, taking children away from socializing with their friends, maybe even other family members, was extremely traumatic. And I think a lot of folks may not realize, what mental state some of your, athletes may be in when they enter into some form of socialization and some sense of normal again. And I think coaches need to keep that in mind. I think they need to keep in mind the vulnerability of our athletes right now, and that the mental health of our athletes is probably more fragile than it has ever been.
Absolutely.
And I think if we overlook that, we could be what we're trying to do in our efforts of getting kids out there, socializing, physical activity, may cause a couple of steps backwards if we're pushing them too hard, and we don't realize the fragility of our students and our athletes and our families. We're all craving to go back to some sense of normal. We're all done with this. I am too. There's nothing special. Physicians, and again, I'm a primary care physician that does orthopedic work, so I live the life of a primary care physician as well as a specialist. And I'm a primary care physician in one of the hardest hit communities in the Commonwealth, in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So, the physicians I work with, the patients I work with, we know all too well what toll this particular year has taken on, all of us mentally, physically, on our patients, and on the families in the communities in which we serve. So there's this overarching anxiety, stress, and I would even say depression that is got to be at the forefront of what we're thinking about when we're trying to engage with our athletes and our families and our parents. And there's fear, right? People want to get back out there, but they're fearful of COVID, right? So I think we have to also be mindful of that. In a situation where you've been like, oh, well, I'm not going to care about that parent, or, that they're just being outspoken. That's probably,
Right.
parent right now might be more of the majority than the minority. They're going to want to know what you're doing, what protocols you have in place, what does this look like in terms of if someone does contract COVID, and how does this look like in terms of looking through reporting and making sure who was there and contact tracing. These are all things that we were never thinking about as coaches and as organizations prior to 2020. So these are all really important things that we also have to keep on our in the forefront of our minds as we're trying to lay out a practice, trying to lay out a game plan. There is going to be a heightened sense of anxiety and stress amongst all participants, whether it be the players themselves, to the parents that are bringing them, to spectators, and whoever knows how many spectators we're going to have when we roll into April. I know that's a moving target. We're gonna have to see what the Department of Public Health will allow us to do. But at the end of the day, my biggest dream is for folks to be able to go back to some sense of normal. It pains me as a primary care and as an orthopedic physician to know that kids have not been participating in sports, have not been socializing,
Right.
which is really extremely critical to their development. I've seen a fair number of students that have gained a significant amount of weight in a very short period of time, because of social isolation, anxiety, depression, and lack of physical activity. So we're going to want to get kids out there, but we want to do it in a safe fashion. And
Absolutely.
aware of all of our blind spots.
Yeah. And I think, to the points that you've been making, it's having that open communication, not only, from coaches to players, but coaches to parents as well.
Right.
And making sure, their mental health of all involved is definitely a priority. And then it's, hey, okay, now next step is getting them used to even having a ball at their foot again, and being back on the pitch, and what that experience, that essentially a new experience for them is like.
Exactly. I mean, it's going to be, like I said, I would say that this is going to be a lot of extra work that all parties have to kind of go into a social contract with one another.
Yes.
You know what? I used to think soccer was dropping my kid off at practice, rolling in an hour later, picking them up, and then doing the same for games. It's going to be a lot different. It's going to look a lot different this year. And all people that are involved, surrounding that athlete needs to be fully invested and really bought into what we're trying to do as an organization to carry out as safe of a soccer season as possible. Because our kids deserve it. We need to try to establish some sense of normal in a safe fashion.
Absolutely.
And sports does that. Sports checks all the boxes for that.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, there's a lot more investment that's going to happen. And I empathize with all the member clubs. ISA. Again, I'm a COVID safety officer for my own soccer club in Andover. So I know fully well how much time and investment and energy and meetings and planning and document creation and COVID waivers that have to be implemented before we can fully execute a safe season.
Right. And it will be worth it. It will, just like you said, just to bring some sort of normalcy back to the kids' lives, the coaches, the parents' life. Because you're right, sports does that for people.
Yep.
And I think, hopefully we can all rally behind that and get back on the fields in a safe way for those towns and clubs that didn't have a fall season. So.
Yep, definitely. That's great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. I truly appreciate, your thoughtfulness in this process, and sharing the information that you had with all of our members. So.
Certainly. Thank you so much. I'm happy that I was able to spread some information to our member clubs here for Mass Youth Soccer. And I wish everyone a safe and healthy season, and as injury-free as possible.
Yes. Thank you so much.